Hello and welcome to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. Donald Trump's decision to start the process to end the Iran nuclear deal is a big deal. Is this the path towards still another war? Also, the so-called Russiagate scandal takes a bizarre turn. It's almost impossible to believe. Cross-talking some real news. I'm joined by my guest here in Moscow, Mark Slobota. He's an international affairs and security analyst. We also have Viktor Olevich. He is a political analyst as well as a leading expert at the Center for Actual Politics. And, of course, we have Dmitry Babich. He's a political analyst with Sputnik International. All right, gentlemen, as always, Crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I always appreciate it. I want to continue, because we've talked about it last week. Donald Trump has started the move to walk away from the Iran deal. None of us are surprised by that. It was widely expected. But Victor, how he did it did surprise me a little bit. On social media, email, SMSs, while the president was speaking, I was receiving an amazing number of messages saying, Peter, how is it possible that the President of the United States is saying what he's saying? Because factually speaking, it is at odds with reality. Victor?
You know, we are moving towards a new 2003 moment when Europe, Russia, other nations, including in the Middle East, are opposed to a conflagration that the U.S. is building towards. And there are very, very few countries that support that. It's Israel, some countries in the Persian Gulf.
Israel, Saudi Arabia,
right.
And the United Arab Emirates.
And the speech that Donald Trump actually made was egregious in its falsities. You'd think he made allegations that Iran somehow supports Al-Qaeda. You know, one has to think, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, these are Salafite radicals, Sunni radicals, really. And to them, Iran and the Shia are not just apostates. They are enemies that have to be destroyed in their view.
The interesting thing is if we look at, when you bring up the issue of fighting ISIS and all that, I mean, Iran wouldn't be doing this in Iraq if it hadn't been for the illegal invasion of Iraq in 2003, going back to your point, this moment, this 2003 moment. Mark, is this ask the obvious question here? Is this a drive to war?
I think it is indeed a first baby step in that direction.
Softening everybody up.
First of all, it has to be said that this refusal to certify what is the Iranian Nuclear Agency Review Act.
And this is an American
This is an American legislation passed by Congress in order to support and to check to put a leverage on Obama's negotiation of this deal with the P5 plus 1 plus
Trump
the
has
EU.
inherited.
Yes. I think it's a first step towards war. And one of the first indications of that to me is the usual neocons in the commentary in the think tanks immediately perked up their head and said, oh, well, maybe it's a pretty low bar, but everything Trump said seems incredibly reasonable on this to me. And, this was Shadi Hamid at Brookings. All right? As soon as there's the first whiff of possible regime change, the neocons trot out and suddenly discover that Trump is their friend again.
Oh, what Trump had to say was reasonable on foreign policy. That's when I worry here. Dima, the problem with this is of course, and it happens with American presidents, it's always the domestic audience here. But there are other signatories to this agreement.
Yes,
and the Iranians have made it very clear that they're not going to renegotiate this at all. And the American European allies they actually went to Washington and petitioned Trump and his functionaries not to start walking away from it.
The European Union is not even petitioning. They just said that the United States can't destroy this agreement because it was an agreement between Iran and the group of nations,
the thing is that they want to
including
use
the United
sanctions.
Nations.
Okay, this is going to be the strategy: is that the U.S. walks away from it, and then any other country, obviously not including Iran, because that would be a different set of sanctions. They would start sanctioning European companies for dealing with Iran.
Absolutely. It's actually very, very counterproductive for the U.S. in a number of ways. First of all, the transatlantic relationship, is not in the best shape anyway since Trump came to power in the U.S. Second of all, the willingness unwillingness of the U.S. to come away from well-respected agreements and attempt to change them by force, it seriously impacts on American reputation for the future, on the reputation of American diplomacy. Because if you
does official Washington, I want to ask all three, does official Washington actually care about that? Moving the goalpost, changing the rules in the middle of the game.
Well,
do they care?
American diplomats have to care about it because American power is not in ascension anymore. They understand. They understand that their power is declining. In that, even now, right now, it's not in 10 years, 20 years. Right now, it's in decline, and they have to understand that they do understand that the reputation of the United States as a broker, as a diplomatic broker in the world, whether it concerns the Far East and the future of the Korean Peninsula, whether it concerns other areas of the Middle East, of Latin America.
Well, certainly this walkaway makes a deal with North Korea almost much.
Of course, exactly.
Yeah, well, I think it's a good thing what is going on, strangely, because the stupidity of this is so astounding that finally it can bring a good result. Because what's going on is indeed a repetition of the Iraqi story, but on a much greater scale. I mean, the incompetence of George Bush Jr. is nothing compared to the incompetence of Trump. So in that sense, I'm prepared.
That's a debatable point.
I'm prepared to use the slogan from the Big Lebowski. I think it goes well about Trump.
Our literary analogy.
Absolutely.
Here, yes, there we go.
They thought he was incompetent and a time-wasting nitwit. They were right. So the whole story is that all the critique of Trump was right.
Politico came out and said that Nikki Haley had her fingerprints on this speech. What do you think, Mark?
Well, maybe Nikki Haley's neocon speechwriters had a finger in it, but I seriously doubt whether Nikki Haley, this former real estate accountant from
Max
the South,
Blumenthal said to RT that Nikki Haley's experience in foreign affairs was a few visits to the International House of Pancakes.
And that might be stretching.
I wish I had said that. Max Blumenthal, that's a great stuff.
That might be stretching it. But this speech was obviously bellicose. It does more than just question the U.S.'s reliability as a partner. Europe had an 8-year honeymoon with Obama.
Yep.
And to be fair, if this was Hillary Clinton leading this decertification, they would probably be getting in line for it. But it's Trump. And they need to be, they're reminded again after George Bush, now again with Trump, that every 4 years they face the prospect of being stuck with a U.S. that they simply can't, at least values-wise, align with. But more than that, this is a big threat. Once again, the U.S. is the world's biggest problem with nuclear proliferation efforts around the world. They keep sabotaging this. Again, we saw Libya, we saw Iraq, Saddam Hussein, we're seeing this occur with North Korea, and now with Iran. Iran comes to the deal with a civilian nuclear program, and under blackmail from the Obama regime, it agrees to this nuclear deal, but they came to the table. Now, what are other countries going to draw from this, that if you even try to enter into negotiations, the U.S. has no good faith in these negotiations? With the P5+1, with the UN Security Council, the International Atomic Energy Agency, Germany, France, the UK, China, and Russia, all agreeing that Iran is in full compliance with the deal.
But Victor, then Marcus, absolutely. But who benefits from what Trump said?
Look,
is there any beneficiaries?
Israel and Saudi Arabia.
First of all, back to your question about Politico. That leak to Politico has a domestic angle. It's well known that Trump is not that happy with Tillerson, and he has criticized him openly, said that he is too soft. And Nikki Haley is positioning herself to take Tillerson's seat at the head of the State Department.
It's likely to be Pompeo.
But she's looking.
Yeah,
she's being used as a wedge.
Right.
Okay.
And so it's a way of promoting her for this position. Doesn't mean she's going to get it. Doesn't mean that she has competitors, as Mark rightly said. But this is a way to sort of PR, a way of promoting her. Now, as far as beneficiaries of Trump, again, it's several countries in the Middle East. First and foremost, Israel. It's Saudi Arabia and some other Gulf monarchies that see Iran as their main adversary in the region. And certainly some parts of the American national security establishment that are either tied to the interests of those countries, and let's remember some are tied to the interests of foreign nations, foreign allies of the U.S., and some that would like to benefit from the war itself.
From the arms that would be manufactured.
Right.
One of the interesting things looking at cable television in the U.S. is that it's another stick to beat Russia, but the Iranians will be backed up by the Russians. I kept hearing that over and over again.
Well, that's true, but
to what degree is it true? Russia signed the agreement like the Europeans did and the Americans and the Iranians. I mean, they're respecting the agreement.
But the parallel with Russia is that they have no evidence on Iran, just like they have no evidence about Russia getting involved in the American elections. They have no evidence that Iran has ever supported terrorist strikes, including strikes against Israel. So I'm not even sure Israel would benefit from this kind of thing.
They benefit from the chaos in the region. I think that's what they like more than anything
establishment,
else.
You know, the Israeli hawks might benefit, people like Netanyahu. But Israel wants to be a dominant military force in the region. That's true, okay. But, you know, the wisdom is not about being the strongest one. The wisdom is not creating enemies where you don't have enemies.
This wisdom, you know, you have Iraq now that is strongly aligned with Iran. Now Syria also. I mean, all the way up to Israel's border, all the way up to the occupied Golan Heights. Here, Israeli strategy is just complete mystery to me. It always fails. Gentlemen, we're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on some real news. Stay with RT. Welcome back to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter LaBelle. To remind you, we're discussing some real news. Okay, gentlemen, well into the a year of investigations and reports and suspicions and allegations, and I could go on and on about Russiagate here. We have a new twist. The CNN is breaking new ground here, Mark, this Pokemon Go, which I really don't have a great idea what that is, but apparently this is a game that you can play in app. And the Russians have captured it and controlled it and flipped elections, apparently.
Yeah, this is where Russiagate jumps the shark.
Jumps the shark. ConsortiumNews.com, I think.
It's what we have here. Out of this report actually originated in CNN Money. Of all places, which has been kind of a breeding ground for these ridiculous Russiagate stories, and we literally have, quote, Russian-linked Pokemon Go, quote, tentacles, unquote, out of a, quote, shadowy troll farm. Yeah. You know, I mean, this has, of course, this is blown up in their faces entirely. The internet just you know, reacted with complete mockery, memes galore, Putin riding on the back of Pikachu with his shirt off and everything.
One wonders about Tetris.
It actually discredits the whole Russiagate story to a tremendous amount.
But what it tells me, again, I'm sick and tired of this because I'm tired of talking about allegations and there are no facts to talk about. But Victor, this is the state of journalism. This is the sad state of journalism here, where, you know, I mean, alternative media is criticized for clickbait and trying to get eyeballs and all that. I mean, but this is the model of companies like CNN. I mean, just clickbait, mindless stories that have no basis in reality or meaningful reality.
There's another angle to it too. They've been, you know, one of the reasons they're saying this, and they've connected this Pokemon story to racial strife in the U.S., to Black Lives Matter, to police. Right. So what are they trying to do in this way? They're trying to say essentially that the hostilities in the U.S., the hostilities between the minorities and the police, are caused not so much by real issues, but because Russians or the Chinese or somebody else is stoking it. But in reality, the people that are coming out in their thousands in Washington, D.C., in Baltimore, in New York, in L.A., and other American cities, they know full well they're there not because Russia or somebody else is telling them to do so. They're not doing it because somebody is using Pokemon, Tetris, or Nintendo to get them there. It's not just ridiculous. It's a travesty.
Well, it's nothing new. It's nothing new. In the 1960s, the FBI smeared the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King as communist agents. This is an old Cold War
Even
card.
though Martin Luther King was actually an anti-communist.
This is an old Cold War card replayed for the modern day.
But the interesting thing is that these ridiculous conspiracy theories is a explanation for the failure of the Western political elites. It is the failure of mainstream media. Is that the entire approach of neoliberalism of the last 40 years has created the conditions that we have on the ground right now. They just don't want to take responsibility for it. It must be somebody else's fault.
Well, the problem is that they have to go further and further. They can't get back. I mean, the expression in the Washington Post, that might help the Senate committee to get to the bottom of what happened in the Russia inquiry, end of quote.
What does this have to do with the Russia inquiry? It has nothing to do with elections whatsoever.
But that shows how it's moved on. The fishing expedition has moved on.
There is that expression, foggy bottom. I think getting to the bottom of the Russian involvement, there was no Russian involvement, and the bottom of it is that simply Americans now, they have to go through something that Serbs and many other nations have gone through before. Serbs were told many times, you committed crimes, you are the criminals of the Balkans. Prove us, show us the evidence. No, but this senator said this and that senator said that. You are criminals because our media says it. Right. So now Americans have to go through the same ordeal that the Serbs and the Libyans and the Syrians have gone through.
Particularly if Hillary Clinton says it's true.
There obviously has to be a Super Mario subcommittee on the House Intelligence panel to investigate, the secret cipher used in that program.
Pokemon go to the bottom of it.
Okay. All right, let's switch gears a little bit. UNESCO, the United States announced that it's going to be leaving this cultural organization, Israel as well, here. And it seems to me, again, looking at their rationale for it, I'm not a big fan of UN organizations that spend a lot of money. Okay, I'm not. But
this is one of the more better, harmless ones.
But you can see the evidence of their work. I've seen a lot of the stuff around the world that they've invested money in here. But it seems to me that the U.S. and Israel are withdrawing from it because UNESCO respects the rule of law and international law, and I think it's very, very clear. It's kind of exceptionalism meets international law, and this is where the breakdown happens.
Yeah, it is pretty much just contempt for international law, and it has to be said one of the better aspects of international law is something that you can hardly find fault with. It's pretty hard to understand even the rationale, but it can only be celebrated. The U.S. and Israel pulling out of this, and it has to be said that the day after they did, the first French Jewish was elected the head of UNESCO, so that that brings in the question there. But this only decreases the U.S. standing. It shows their contempt for dealing with any international bodies.
As far as I remember, they were only part. They were actually just nominally part of it. They were only part of the media angle to make sure that they could spin that. I was at the UNESCO headquarters, and that was the only. They showed up, one person, just to keep an eye on the show, but all the other issues that the cultural work the U.S. had already withdrawn from, so it was there for political reasons.
This is all because of UNESCO's support of Palestine.
Right.
Of the recognition of Palestine.
This past week could be called, the ultimate American-Israeli Friendship Week. It started with threats to label the Revolutionary Guards Corps, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps, a terrorist organization. It's part of the Iranian army. By doing that, you would be calling the Iranian army officially a terrorist organization. It proceeded with a synchronized exit of the U.S. and Israel from UNESCO, and it ended with
three hurrahs
with Trump's speech against Iran.
U.S., Israel, Saudi Arabia. I mean, this is a menage a trois of epic proportions.
But I I think it's very logical.
I thought we weren't going to talk about Hollywood. Okay,
yes.
go ahead.
Let's not forget that the United States supports the Ukrainian regime, which destroys cultural cooperation between Ukraine and Russia. They banned thousands of books, actually all the books from Russia that praise what they call the aggressor country, Russia. What kind of cultural cooperation can you talk about if the United States and the EU support such a regime? How Israel supports cultural cooperation with the Arabs, we all know, right? Especially in Gaza, places like that. So I think it would be logical now for the European Union also to leave that organization, because if they support the regimes which impose cultural sanctions, what we see against Russia right now, what we saw against Serbia, what we saw against Syria, these were in fact cultural sanctions. So if they're like that, let them leave, right?
All of the cultural things that have been destroyed in Syria over the last 6 years here. All right, gentlemen.
By organizations that had the support
and money that was spent there. Hey, gentlemen, I want to move on real quick. What's on your mind, Mark? I want a story from each one of you in the time we have left.
In Syria, this implementation of this Astana agreement, Turkey has moved military forces into al-Qaeda-occupied Idlib under escort of al-Qaeda. I mean, it's called...
You learned that on the BBC and CNN, right?
No, they're not reporting it very well.
Of course they're not.
But, I mean, you will find references to it. This is, and certainly all the experts in the area, the journalists, tweeting amongst themselves are commenting on it. All right, this is Al-Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. This is the latest alias of Al-Qaeda. They're firmly in control of Idlib province. It's a jihadi paradise there. And Turkey, which has illegally armed, trained, and salaried these and other jihadi proxies for the last 6 years, they enter Idlib not to fight Al-Qaeda, but under Al-Qaeda escort to take up positions against the Kurdish canton in Afrin. This is a complete violation of the Astana agreement. The Syrian government has called for Turkey to get out. Turkey, meanwhile, in the other area they control in north-central Syria, is setting up Turkish government post offices. Erdogan doesn't plan on leaving Syria anytime soon.
You know, Victor, one of the things, again, looking at the mainstream about cheering on Trump defeating ISIS in Syria and Iraq, I find it really just astounding. The heavy lifting that Russia has been involved in the last couple of years gets no airtime at all. It's all the credit is given to the U.S.
I think several weeks ago we've talked about this, that every time there is a war and the U.S. enters at some point, then the United States declares itself the victor. And we are seeing that today again. So we could predict it in several years when the crisis in Syria is going to end, articles, books are going to be written about it. People are going to find stuff about it in textbooks. Whether they're going to read in the U.S., whether they're going to read in London or in Canada or in France, they're going to read that there was the Americans that came in and bombed the hell out of ISIS, and they saved Syria and they saved everyone, both from ISIS and from its. And since Trump now says that Iran supports ISIS, well, it was from ISIS and from Iran and from other bad actors.
What they will not read is that ISIS would never have been beaten in Iraq or in Syria without Iranian help. Never.
Okay, never.
Of course.
Well, for me, the most astounding news was the announcement by the Russian Defense Ministry that while everyone was afraid of Russian troops participating in the military exercise in Belarus to invade Lithuania, Estonia, Zapad 2017, Estonia or Poland, the United States increased the tank brigade that is stationed in Poland basically to the size of a tank division, in Russian terms, which means hundreds of U.S. tanks from Colorado in the steppes of Poland, right next to the Russian border. If we look at the numbers, we actually have now about 10,000 NATO troops right on the border with Russia.
Don't forget 4,000 NATO troops now stationed in the Black Sea in
also
Romania.
in Romania, yes.
But the storyline is that Russia is being aggressive towards NATO.
Look, Russia is being aggressive towards NATO by moving troops within its own territory.
Oh, that's threatening too. Gentlemen,
Russia is being aggressive by simply being there.
We've run out of time here. Many thanks to my guests here in Moscow, and thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, crosstalk rules.